Her husband had been secretly medicating her for 4 months, not because she was sick, because he needed her to look sick. She didn't know. She thought she was losing her mind. She thought the anxiety was back, worse than before. She thought her memory was failing. She thought she was becoming someone she didn't recognize. And every single time she expressed that fear, he held her hand, looked her in the eyes, and told her he was scared too, that he just wanted her to get better, that he loved her and couldn't bear watching her deteriorate. He was the one causing the deterioration. And the reason he needed her declared legally incompetent was $2.3 million sitting in a trust with her name on it. Before we go any further, every story on this channel reflects one person's experience. Relationships are complex, and no single account captures the full picture. If anything here connects to something you're living through, please reach out to a licensed professional. You don't have to sort through something this serious alone. Her name was Claudette, 46 years old, Savannah, Georgia, former art teacher. 19-year marriage to a man named Warren, commercial real estate developer, 12 years older than her, calm, organized, and by every outward appearance, a devoted husband. They had no children. Claudette had come into the marriage with a trust fund worth $2.3 million, left to her by her grandmother. Her elderly parents were still living. Their estate was also substantial. Warren had known all of this before he ever proposed. She came into my office on a Wednesday morning and sat in the corner chair, the one with the wall directly behind her and a clear line of sight to the door. People who have recently felt unsafe do that without realizing it. She looked composed, but her hands were pressed flat against her thighs, and she didn't move them once. Before I could say a word, she said, "I need you to tell me I'm not crazy, because I've spent 8 months being told I am, and I'm starting to believe it." I told her to start from the beginning. 6 years before she walked into my office, Claudette had gone through a genuine mental health crisis, severe anxiety disorder. At its worst, it required a short inpatient stay. She had fought her way back, slowly, honestly, with real work. By the time this story began, she had been stable for years. She was painting again, sleeping well. She felt, she told me, like herself for the first time in a long time. Then Warren started looking at her differently. It was subtle at first, a careful measuring look in the mornings, like he was assessing her before she'd said a single word. She mentioned it to him. He said he was just worried, that she seemed tired. She accepted it. Then conversations she had no memory of began to surface. Warren would reference things she had supposedly agreed to, at dinner, during a drive, before bed. She had no recollection. Not vague recollection, none. She started wondering if something was wrong with her brain, whether the anxiety was doing something new, something she hadn't experienced before. She told me, "I started keeping a notebook, writing down what I said, what I agreed to, what happened each day, because I was terrified I was losing things." Warren's response when she told him about the notebook was quiet, practiced sorrow. He said he was glad she was tracking things because, honestly, he'd been worried about her memory for a while. He said he'd mentioned it to her before, but she hadn't seemed to remember that conversation either. He said, very gently, that he thought it might be time to see her psychiatrist. She went. Warren came with her. He did most of the talking. He described memory lapses, confusion, emotional dysregulation. He mentioned her inpatient history. He mentioned, carefully, that she had seemed paranoid lately, suspicious of people who were only trying to help her. The psychiatrist, who had no reason to doubt a calm, organized, clearly devoted husband, adjusted her medication and recommended increased monitoring. He used the word care, as in a higher level of care if things continued. Claudette sat in that appointment and felt the floor drop out from under her, because she did not recognize the person Warren was describing. But Warren was so steady, so sad, so believable, and her history was sitting in that room like a piece of evidence she couldn't argue with. She went home. She tried to talk to him that night. He held her hand. He said, "I just want you to get better. I'm scared of losing you to this." She believed him. For 3 more months, she believed him. And then her sister Diane came to visit. Diane had never liked Warren. Claudette had always explained it away. Personality clash, different energy. They just didn't mesh. Warren was loud and direct. Warren was precise and controlled. That was the story Claudette had been telling herself for years. Diane arrived on a Thursday while Warren was at work. Within 2 hours of being in that house, she went to refill her water glass in the kitchen. On the counter near the coffee maker was Claudette's pill organizer, the weekly kind, each compartment labeled by day. Diane picked it up without really thinking, opened Thursday, then Wednesday, then Tuesday. She walked back into the living room and said, "Can I ask you something without you getting upset?" Claudette said yes. Diane held out her palm. In it were 3 small pills, found loose, tucked underneath the regular medications inside Tuesday's compartment, not in any prescription bottle, just there, hidden under everything else. Claudette had never seen them before. They didn't confront Warren. Diane was firm about that. She took the pills when she left 2 days later and had them tested through a contact at a clinical lab. The results came back within the week. 2 were a low-dose benzodiazepine. The third was a compound used in much higher doses as an antipsychotic, but in small, consistent amounts, introduced quietly into a daily routine, it could produce exactly the symptoms Warren had been describing to her doctor: confusion, memory disruption, emotional instability. Claudette had been drugged by her husband, consistently, for at least 4 months. Now here is the part that I still find difficult to say out loud. Once Diane had those lab results, she didn't stop. She contacted an attorney. She started pulling on every thread she could find. And what she found was this: 18 months earlier, a full 6 months before Claudette noticed the first strange look on Warren's face in the morning, Warren had quietly consulted with an elder law attorney, not for estate planning. He had gone in specifically to ask about the legal process for having a spouse declared mentally incompetent, what rights a husband would have over assets in that scenario, whether a documented psychiatric history was relevant to a competency proceeding, what standard of evidence a court would require. He had been planning this for at least a year and a half before Claudette ever noticed anything was wrong. He had identified the target, her trust, her inheritance, her parents' future estate. He had identified the obstacle, her legal competency, and he had begun, methodically, to remove that obstacle. He knew her history. He knew her greatest fear was losing her mind. He had watched her fight her way back from a real crisis, learned exactly what that fight had cost her, and then used every detail of it as the blueprint for what he was doing to her now. I want to be precise about what this is, clinically. The word gaslighting gets used loosely today. People use it to describe feeling dismissed or having a disagreement go unacknowledged. That's not what this was. What Warren did to Claudette is what the term was originally coined to describe: a deliberate, sustained campaign to make a person doubt their own perception of reality, executed by someone with intimate knowledge of their psychological vulnerabilities, using those vulnerabilities as the primary mechanism of destruction. He didn't just lie to her, he constructed an entire false reality and then chemically impaired her ability to resist it. When Claudette sat across from me and finally heard all of it laid out, the timeline, the attorney consultation, the lab results, what the medications could do in the doses she had been receiving, she went very still. She didn't cry. She looked at her hands for a long moment, then looked up and said, "So none of it was real. The confusion, the memory, none of it was me." I said, "None of it was you." She nodded once, and something moved across her face that I can only describe as a person reclaiming something that had been taken from them. I explained to Claudette that what she had been experiencing had a clinical name: induced psychological destabilization through coercive control. Her confusion, her self-doubt, her terror that she was losing her mind, these were not symptoms, they were injuries, caused deliberately by someone who had calculated exactly how much damage was needed to make her appear incompetent to a court, while keeping her functional enough that no one outside the marriage would notice. That is a very specific and very cold kind of calculation. And I told her that her instinct, the notebook, the careful documentation, the part of her that kept saying something is wrong, even when every voice around her said she was paranoid, that instinct had been right from the beginning. Her mind, even while being chemically undermined, had been trying to save her. Together, we looked at what she knew to be true, independent of anything Warren had ever told her. We built that list carefully. She was an artist who had rebuilt her mental health through genuine discipline. She was a woman who had, under sustained psychological and chemical assault, still found a way to document what was happening to her. The notebook she had kept, which Warren had framed as evidence of her deterioration, was, I told her, the most lucid thing in that entire house. It was the record of a person who refused, even without knowing why, to stop trusting herself entirely. We talked about what rebuilding actually looks like after something like this. It is not fast. The damage coercive control does to a person's epistemic confidence, their basic ability to trust their own mind as a reliable source of information, is some of the deepest damage I work with. Because before Claudette could address anything external, she had to first rebuild her relationship with her own perceptions. She had to learn, again, that what she saw was what was there, that what she remembered had happened, that what she felt was real. That sounds simple. After 8 months of systematic dismantling, it is anything but. I reminded her that there would be days, many of them, for a long time, when she would hear Warren's voice inside her own thinking, telling her she was remembering wrong, that she was overreacting, that she was paranoid. That voice doesn't leave quickly. It was installed through repetition, and it exits the same way, slowly, through consistent counter-experience. The goal is not to silence it immediately. The goal is to learn to recognize it as foreign, as his, not hers. She was already working with an attorney by the time she came to see me. The legal process was complicated. Warren had resources, and he had documentation he had built with deliberate care. But Claudette had the lab results. She had Diane. She had her notebook with dates, times, and Warren's exact phrases that, placed alongside his statements to her psychiatrist, formed a pattern that was very hard to explain away as coincidence. I won't tell you how the legal situation has resolved, because it is still ongoing and it is not mine to share publicly. What I will tell you is that Claudette is no longer in that house. She is somewhere safe. The medications that were not hers are gone from her system, and she is, session by session, finding her way back. She said something about 2 months into our work together that I haven't stopped thinking about. She said, "The money I can fight for, that's just money. What I can't get back are the months I spent believing I was disappearing. He took those, and he took them on purpose." She paused. Then she said very quietly, "That's what I need people to understand. He didn't just want my money. He wanted me to not exist. He wanted a version of me that couldn't argue, couldn't remember, couldn't be believed. And he almost got it. She almost let him." That is what I want you to carry with you from this story. Not the money, not even the legal betrayal. The fact that a person who loved and trusted someone completely was brought to the edge of believing she had lost her mind by the precise and patient work of the one person she had trusted most. And the fact that what saved her was a notebook, a simple notebook she kept because some part of her refused to stop knowing what she knew. If you are in a relationship where your memory is constantly being questioned, where your perceptions are regularly corrected, where you have started to feel like you can no longer trust what you see and hear and feel, please take that seriously. Not every situation is Warren, but that feeling of losing your grip on your own reality is never something to explain away. Talk to someone, a therapist, a doctor, a sister who notices things under pill organizers, someone outside the walls of what is being built around you. I want to hear from you in the comments today. Has there ever been a moment in your life when someone made you doubt something you absolutely knew to be true? And how long did it take you to trust yourself again? That question matters more than you might think. Like this video if Claudette's story moved you, subscribe to Kinshade Stories if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.